Welcome to Chris and Jen in the Morning,
where it's always morning somewhere. I'm Chris. My goodness, why is that so hard?
And I'm Jen. And I think we just roll with that.
Good with that.
Just roll with that.
Gives you the real behind-the-scenes experience.
I did manage to keep myself from saying he's Chris.
One day I'm going to get it. I'm going to do it right.
One day. For some reason, I thought you were supposed to say, I'm Chris, and I was to say, I'm Jen, and then you say, where it's always morning somewhere, even though we've done this how many times, and that's never the way it's been.
I don't know. It just goes to show we make it up as we go.
Well, welcome. I'm still drinking my coffee, so cheers to that.
I have no excuse. I'm perfectly caffeinated. You know.
You're Chris.
I'm Chris. A little
You're
slow
Chris.
Today, apparently.
The whole one. It's probably, I've just done an energy transference after waking up late, accidentally, and frantically trying to get myself ready without being late. I think I actually did a pretty decent job of that this morning.
Yeah. You're very punctual today.
The problem is just all of Jen wasn't here, so it took us about an hour of chit-chatting before we are warmed up. So,
right, like we show up, but we're not always like present, you know?
So we'll work on that next.
So as we always start, let's start with some gratitude moments. I'll kick us off. Part of the wonderful things of living in New York City is that there's always a lot happening, like to celebrate all the different cultures and just all the uniqueness that the city has. And one way that they do that is through a lot of different parades through the different neighborhoods. They have the big ones that a lot of people hear about in Manhattan, but also smaller neighborhoods hold like street festivals and things like that. I was thinking about like how all of these things come together. It really takes someone with a very unique skill set to be able to do this well. You have to know how to plan. You have to know how to, rally people and make sure that they're like working on the right things. As I've like reflected on that, I've realized probably not an area that I would be super great in, but I am so grateful that we have people who do have those skill sets and who can bring these wonderful things to the neighborhoods, but also the city in totality that it is known for.
So you're not going to become an event planner in your next round?
No.
I guess then you won't be the star of any Hallmark movies because that's like what they do. They just naturally take on event planning for the small town.
Yeah. I'm okay with that. I don't think I need to be in a Hallmark movie. I don't know. I've never really thought about that.
I mean, maybe.
You know what? If the offer comes across my desk, I'll look at it.
Well, for the record, I think that you are fairly good at actually event planning me. So, just which I am grateful for. Which I am grateful for. But my gratitude moment this morning is just about the willingness of people to be vulnerable and to share, to create more understanding and help people kind of from an empathy standpoint. So last night I was watching this show on Netflix. It's some like Australian show. I think it's called something like You Can't Ask That. And it's 5 seasons.
Wow.
Yeah. But they've got all of these different kind of marginalized segments of population, whether it's based on the way they choose to live their life or something about them or something they've done. And it's, I think, directed and produced incredibly well, in my opinion. But it's the things that maybe if you can't relate, you don't understand. And so you may have formed some judgments about it and also just be misinformed. And there are people willing to show up knowing that this show is about like the people that watch it are people who go, oh yeah, that seems odd to me. I don't understand that. And they're just willing to be vulnerable um, there on camera and answer questions. And um, I was watching it, like binging it, basically going, um, like, this is really fascinating to understand more from a different perspective. But I also can now understand how hard it is to get in front of a camera with a microphone and share even a small part of yourself and be
Yeah.
vulnerable. So the fact that they were all willing to do that in a really big way, um, I'm just really grateful that people are willing to put themselves out there and do that. And it kind of made me think about um, how often you actually do see that. Um, and and I think we often take that for granted, but I appreciate that there are people that are willing to share their experience and their story so that we can gain some perspective and come together and understand each other a little more and see each other not just as these labels but as like actual humans. And so often you hear things and you think, oh, I didn't really think about that. I guess I understand how that makes sense. um, so I was feeling very grateful for um, the fact that people are willing to be that vulnerable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we talked last week, right, in the allyship episode around like the ability to build empathy is seeking to understand and, you know, people willing on both sides to sit down and have a conversation. And I do think a lot of times it can be scary and we want to show up a certain way. And, I personally don't really ever want to offend people. And so it's like trying to find that, line to walk, while also trying to learn and seek more information. But like with a show like this, it sounds like the whole purpose is be ready. It's going to be some intense questions that are going to be asked.
Yeah. I mean, I highly recommend it just as an exercise in like putting yourself in a place where you understand somebody else's point of view, and it maybe teaches you to be a little more thoughtful about the quick snap judgments that we make about people.
Yeah.
Um, just creates kind of some awareness because it makes something that seems novel a bit more relatable and human. Regardless of, you know, how you feel at the end of the day about the topic, like it still just makes them more relatable. And it's a lot harder to um, oppress people that you relate to.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to have to look this up. I've not heard of it before.
yeah, oh, oh, it was really interesting. So at least for me.
I'll watch a few episodes and get back to you. That's my
Yeah,
homework.
well, I mean, you can see they are all titled with what they're about, and there are some that are obviously a little bit more out there than others. So, choose a variety.
Happy viewing.
Happy viewing.
Engage how you would like.
I do recommend.
All right.
So, you talked a little bit about organizing Pride. It is Pride Month, which we are really fortunate to get to celebrate.
Yeah.
And, I would love to know, what does Pride mean to you?
Um, so for me, it's like, I think there's like two parts of it. I would say when I was first coming out, it was like getting to go and be surrounded by other like-minded individuals. Pride is, for allies, it is for people who identify within the LGBTQIA community, supporters, organizations. So it was like really an opportunity to come together and kind of party and celebrate and get to be with people and like in a larger safe space that necessarily didn't always feel like was in my daily life. So for me, it was this really just fun thing, like a fun outlet and of like meeting up and just seeing all of the celebratory activities and music and just it's a lot of fun. If you've never been
Yeah,
to a Pride,
I
highly
didn't think
recommend it.
about that. Like from your perspective of being in a place where you had to fight to not hide who you were, and then you start to show people who you are, and it's a big risk. Uh, I imagine you don't often get the luxury of stepping into a place where you can really go embrace your whole self and find a lot of other people who are doing the same, and that's a positive thing that you can celebrate.
Yeah, I think it's um I th- I think I go into places as like my true authentic self,
Yeah.
which I know is not what you were meaning, but I do think there is something different between having to be on guard, even if it's like a conscious or unconscious thing, versus like going into a space that feels like a safe space for you.
Like,
Um,
yeah, this is where you're invited and you're free. You don't have to think about how what you're going to do is going to be
right.
received by other people and what that may mean for you. You can just be who you are.
Exactly. So I absolutely loved that. My first Pride experience was actually in Dallas, Texas, because I was still living in Texas at the time. I went with a group of friends. We like drove down, we parked our cars because the Pride route went through what we would call the gayborhood, where all the gay bars were. And so we parked a little ways away so that we could walk over to the event and just like get to see all of the excitement. And you had people of all ages, of all walks of life. It was just this wonderful experience. You know, whenever I talked about my coming out story and I mentioned there were moments of euphoric excitement, this was one of them. The energy was fun with people that I had come to learn over the last, I guess it was a year at that point that I'd been out. Like, you're getting to celebrate and have this wonderful, amazing time with people. And then also seeing like the different organizations that are like helping sponsor the event. Okay, they're contributing to the community, which then makes me as a consumer, oh, I want to engage with their brand because they're helping move forward our rights. So it was a great experience. Lots of confetti, lots of glitter, lots of loud music. It was very hot in Texas.
June in Texas, like,
So they just recently moved to doing it in June. Back whenever I was going, it was being done in September because it was supposedly cooler. I
it
don't know if I necessarily agree with
depends.
that, but
But in October it rains a lot, and yeah. So
yeah. So, but no, it was a real fun time.
one of the things that you've talked about is, that Pride is not just a party. It's not just a celebration. It is that, but it is about so much more. When did you start to realize that?
Yeah, I had moved to New York by that point just because I think here it takes on a much different perspective because the roots of the Pride parades actually are grounded here. It was in a lot of those. My first New York Pride also was a very, very memorable moment. But as I was going to events and all the different things, like you're starting to hear stories from other people who have lived here for many, many years. Some of them have friends or have heard stories directly from individuals who are impacted. So, what I learned is that there is this very rich history to what we now call pride parades, but it was not a pride parade. It did not start that way. It was a protest. It was a riot. It was an uprising. I would say it wasn't until I really started to learn the history about the LGBTQ plus movement that I truly began to understand Pride is a celebration and it is an opportunity to come together as a community and party and have a great time, but it's also a reminder of how we got here and also that we still have some ways to go.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting is human rights movements that are celebrated in the same way have similar things like rallies that are synonymous, I think, with the experience. Yet they call them like a rally, or there's some that are festivals. People think parade. They maybe just don't make that connection
Right.
that this is not the first nor the last human rights
Right.
movement to need to have something that was founded in protest, that then became a celebration of the progress made and a support system for those pushing for
Yeah.
the progress and struggling through experiencing that, and a rally cry for the continued change that must be made. And I think also it occurs to me, like, once you, it's just like, it's similar to personal growth. Like, once you've reached the level and you've checked it off your list, you have to hold the line. Otherwise, you lose
Yeah.
the progress that you've gained. And they tend to be a bit more like ocean waves versus, you know, something just linear. So
Right. Well, and I think with any change, there you make progress and then you lose footing or lose ground or whatever you want to call it. And then, but you have to keep going. You have to keep pushing. Um, and I do think it's interesting because I think a lot of people, when they think parade, right, they're thinking like the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade or, holiday parades, what like, and you do think about them as like these joyous, fun things, smiling faces in the crowd. Some places like candy and trinkets are getting tossed out, and which, look, that is what, if you've been to a pride parade as of recently, like that is that is what they are as
that is what it is.
well.
That's happening.
Right. But the first like real pride parade was in 1970, was in the summer of 1970, following riots that broke out in June of 1969, following a police raid on the Stonewall Inn. As I moved here and started to learn more about this, you hear things, and then I'm the type of person, well, I want to know more. I want to understand. I want to have a greater understanding of where this has come from. It was not those things. It was not smiling faces. It was not joyous faces. It was a protest. It was a fight for rights that were being denied. It's been super interesting to kind of see through the evolution of where I started in this understanding of what it is to now celebrate and all of those things. But let's not forget where this is rooted in, and let's be grateful for the people who started the fight, but also let's hold that line like you were talking about, so that way we don't slip, we don't move backwards.
Yeah. So you're a bit of a history buff. Um,
I don't know if I'd say that, but
okay, by comparison between the two of us, standing next to me, you look like a world expert in history.
okay.
Take
Okay.
note, choose your friends carefully. Choose the ones that when you stand next to them, you look really good.
Life lessons, that's what we're giving out today.
So when it comes to history, standing next to me, you look really good.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the history of Pride and
Yeah.
what we should know.
Yeah. So I will share, like, there is so much, right? And we try to keep our episodes around like an hour-ish, so I can't go into all of the details.
Yeah. Give us the highlights.
Yes. So I would highly recommend, if you find yourself like, ooh, tell me more. There is lots out there. There lots of history, lots of documentaries, lots of well-documented things. So I think to start talking about like where the Pride Parade started, understanding what led up to the Stonewall riots is important, because it's like that catalyst. So
Yeah.
there were a lot of laws and city ordinances that were really created to suppress, oppress, repress, choose your word. Like it was not great. One of the ones that they refer to them as like decency laws. There was one where you had to wear at least 3 garments of clothing of the gender that was on your birth certificate, and socks didn't count. So when you And so the thing that I was watching that was explaining this talked about like, well, your underwear and your like undershirt, if you wear one, that counts as two. That third item can't be your socks. It's going to be like something that's going to mess up your outfit if it's not if it's not what you're wanting it to be. They had made laws like these to keep people who would cross dress or who dressed to a gender that they identified with, not the one that they were given at birth. It was meant to be able to stop them and arrest them and take them
At
to
this
jail.
point, at this point in time, and forgive my ignorance because time is a mystery to me always, as is a timeline on history. Like women are wearing pants at this point,
Yeah,
right? This is
yeah.
in, you said the 70s?
This was the late 60s when all
The
of
late
it,
60s.
50s,
So
60s were
this
happening.
isn't about like June Cleaver, like
No,
keeping the women in skirts.
no,
This is about specifically men wanting to dress like women because
right.
at this point women could wear the things men could wear.
Correct. Correct. And I mean, it goes both ways, right? Like there were men who wanted to wear dresses or high heels. There were
Yeah.
women who wanted to dress masculinely and look a certain way.
Oh,
And
and this
and
oppressed them as well.
correct. Because it is defined by your gender that you were born with. So if a piece of clothing is marketed towards men, that's a piece of clothing that men should be wearing. So
Oh, I
it goes both
see.
ways. A
And
lot
this
of
was
the
in New
history
York?
is a lot of
This
the
is
history is the suppression of cross dressers, what they referred to at the time as transvestites, people who were not conforming to their to gender norms, essentially.
interesting.
Yeah. So a lot of these laws, and then on top of that, like the way that the LGBTQ plus community at that time was treated, it was seen as a something's wrong with you, medically wrong with you.
Yeah.
There were a lot of institutions, there were a lot of doctors who were experts in this. They were performing lobotomies on people. They were given electroshock therapy to try and curb the impulses. Like all of those things were happening, and so it's not like what happened at Stonewall wasn't about like just an establishment being raided and people um being dragged out and put in handcuffs in the back of the car. It it was all of that. It's all of this oppression that's been happening and having to deal with it. Stonewall was actually raided a few days before the event happened in 1969 about this. I think just people were done with it. It's really interesting to read and listen to some of these documentaries because they talk about how there was still this group of like those who had nothing to lose and those who had a lot to lose. So people who were like lawyers or doctors, like you couldn't be found out as gay because you could lose your job. There was no protection. But then there were others who, generally younger individuals who had come out and got kicked out of their homes. They already felt like, well, what more do we have to lose?
They'd already felt like they lost everything.
Correct. When this oppression or when this event happened at the Stonewall Inn, depending on what you read, what you listen to, there are um, different interpretations of it. But what is kind of made clear in all of it, like people of color and the individuals who did not conform with their gender norms were at the front of it. Like, because they were the ones that had it the hardest. They were constantly being stopped and frisked and like just constantly shamed for who they were. They were kind of seen as the final straw in this. And so this raid happens. They come into the bar. They start to what they would do is turn on the lights. Everyone would know, oh, you got to break up, can't be seen, have to show your IDs, you're taken out, usually arrested, put in the back of the paddy wagon and sent off to jail. This night they were done. They started fighting back. It just kind of snowballed in the way of people showing up. People who weren't at the bar were coming. If you've ever been to the area where the Stonewall Inn is, there's like a park in the middle. And so the streets are kind of like in a triangle, and they're shorter. They're shorter
Mm.
blocks than usual New York City blocks. So they talk about how they were able to evade the police because there wasn't a large police presence at first. And so people were able to move around the blocks much faster, to avoid and kind of come up on the other way to distract. So it was like this whole back and forth. Um, but like things ended up broken, people ended up bloodied. Like it was not a good event. Um, because and it turned into not just that night, but that entire weekend they continued to protest. They continued to show up and be agitators because they had just had enough. They wanted to live their lives. They wanted to have the spaces that they wanted, without like the mob was basically running the gay bars back then. Not that they were called gay bars, but people in the
Yeah.
communities knew what they were for. You just have oppression on so many different levels, and people were just fed up with it. So that is where it all got started. That was like the seed planted.
Like the breaking point.
Correct. So June 1969, all of that happens. Then the following year, they decided this needs to be commemorated. The acts that we have, what we've gone through, what happened that back on those nights can't be forgotten.
Yeah.
So they actually people showed up for the first march in June of 1970, and it was commemorating what happened there. And it was people walking in the daylight as their true selves, still without laws protecting them from being fired for being found out, because it wasn't even just about being gay. Even if you supported the gay community, you could be fired for that. So it's like it's this whole suppression that was happening. um and so that's why a lot of times, and I think you hear more, like it's not just a parade.
Yeah.
It's a march. It's a riot. It's like it is more than just a parade.
It's an honoring of the bravery and the courage and the decision to finally take power back,
Correct.
and a reminder uh, to hold the line, and a celebration that uh, regardless of what rights and protections we have, we're going to continue to show up and be here. We're not going
Right.
to hide just because you're not comfortable.
And just to put this in context, right? Like the laws were such as, like, if, say, like we are living in the today. So you, me, Ace, and Frank all go out for dinner one night. You and Ace are holding hands walking up to the restaurant we're going to. Me and Frank are holding hands. We could have gotten stopped and arrested for that, where you two wouldn't even no one would bat an eye at. Like it's that it is like things that were that small were upending people's lives. um and right, people want to show affection, people want to feel like they are with someone special, and or even just that I want to hold your hand, like you
Or at
couldn't.
least to have the choice,
Right.
as opposed to being reminded every time you are anywhere that you just have to pretend to be something you're not, or else you risk your freedom.
Correct. And then, just as a reminder, like as an undertow to all of this, what children were being taught in schools at this point was also that being gay was bad, and you would be found out. If you were found out, then you would go to jail. It was scary. There's so much to, like I said, we don't have time to go into all of it, but
Yeah.
these events are so much bigger than just a parade. So for people who do ask that question about, like, well, why do we need to celebrate Pride? Why do we have, like, why is it such a big deal? It's because we have had to fight for every little inch to not just exist, but to exist and not have like our freedom
Yeah.
threatened. And that's
Well,
what it
and
was.
I mean, as an ally, I think that bravery does deserve to be celebrated, and that choice to stand up deserves to be remembered,
Yep.
um, just as we do with many other human rights movements. As a female, and thinking about female rights, and um, here in the United States, it's not like it was that tremendously long ago that
Right.
women couldn't vote, and it was finally being fed up and taking the power back, that sort of gains that right. And so I can relate in that way from a personal standpoint. And I think understanding more about where the history comes from helps to kind of destigmatize, like, why are these things important? Because
Right.
everyone deserves the right to be who they are fully, and not have to hide a part of themselves, because while they are hurting no one, doesn't fit with norms.
Right.
I was watching something where a video that somebody on social media had made. It was such an obvious thing that I just hadn't ever heard called out. Why are you so afraid of seeing a gay couple? Uh, I saw straight couples my whole life, and it didn't turn me straight. Seeing a gay couple on TV is not going to turn somebody gay. I can tell you, because of my experiences. I have lived with, been parented by, watched straight couples, and I've it's never once turned me straight.
Right.
Um, and I kind of, they said it with a sense of humor and timing that kind of made me giggle, but it still resonates with me because it's so obvious, and yet I just never put those words together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you listen to the rhetoric, even back then by politicians and people of authority, there are echoes of it still today in the things that are being said. I think it's one of those things that when people have had enough, history has shown us that they will push back and push back in a big way. And as I learned more about the history of it, you did have people who were trying to advocate for these laws to be changed, for these things to be normalized. I don't like using that word, but in the secular sense back then, like, they just wanted to be able to exist. But those voices were always pushed aside. They were always looked down upon. They were not taken seriously. And what did it take to gain notoriety in this movement? It took a riot that lasted multiple days, um, because people were just pushed too far. And like you said earlier, there are similarities in different civil rights movements and acts that have occurred. That there are similarities there.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you zoom out a little bit, like, what we see is that marginalized people, marginalized groups of people, whether it's something about you in the way that you were born, something that people can see, something that people can't see, even when you think about politics, as that gets more and more like bifurcated, and anything, like, you go back in history and think about politics, you watch Hamilton, right? You think about the history of where a country started and the breaking free from Great Britain, and you see similarities in themes of people that are going against the grain,
Right.
against what in that moment has been considered normal.
Right.
Not only do you need to make a lot of noise to create change, you don't do that quietly, but you also need a lot of people around you. You need a lot of allies to
Yep.
understand, and you need to not forget. You need to keep remembering, because if you forget, then you kind of lose some of that sense, and we move backwards. I think for me, this pride, what I hope is that people who haven't understood understand a little bit more about why this is so important. What is it that we're fighting for? It's not like just a party where I get to go be extra. This is a time to remember the people who have very bravely stood up
Right.
for their right to take up space, and a reminder that we have to keep creating, people like me have to keep creating space, um, so that there is room to stand.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's, you know, understanding, like I said, the first couple of prides I went to, I did not understand all of this. Like honestly, there was none of this taught in my schooling. And
Yeah.
so it was from hearing bits and pieces and learning. It's there's gay culture. It is a culture for a reason. It is a community for a reason. There is history. There is shared language. There is this community about it. Um, and growing up, I was not exposed to any of it. And
Yeah,
so
it's the
now,
history
as
that's not in the books.
exactly. Well, and it can be. Like, I think that's the other part of this is like, it's not that long ago, right? Like 1969, not that long ago. Um, like, these are things that could be and should be um, educated on, but they're not. And they're not spoken about unless you go like to a university where they have specific studies for these groups. So, I mean, hopefully, like I said, change happens slow. Um, but I'm hoping these things can be taught because I think it's so important for people to understand what you're going through. You're not alone. I think that to me is so important. People have fought and have are still fighting. I just want people to know you're not alone. There is a community. Back when I was coming out, I had to find that. I had to seek that out. I just, I would love for that to not be a hidden thing anymore. So yeah,
So, how is this showing up today? How is history, the things that we've been talking about, how does this show up today?
look, we've come a long ways since 1969. I can go to a gay bar and don't have to be afraid of it being rated anymore. But I will say, the laws that are on the books right now are still majority interpreted, right? So, like, based on the way that the Civil Rights Act were written, they are just now being interpreted in the way of. So, when you think back to Obergefell versus Hodges, which was provided the right for same sex couples to marry, that was an interpretation of the law that the Supreme Court ruled on. So, like, it's not that that has now been written into law. And then in 2022, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas actually, in writing his concurring opinion to overturn Roe versus Wade, said that the Supreme Court should likely go back and revisit other decisions. One of them that he specifically calls out is Obergefell. Yes, we can get married, but that doesn't mean there aren't people who are still actively trying to stop that from being able to happen. That's like one. Crimes against the LGBTQ community, LGBTQIA plus community are still very high. The most at risk is the trans community, and more specifically than that, the trans community of color. Crimes constantly happening against them, many times just getting brushed aside. They don't get the news coverage that they deserve to have. It's still showing up the same. Like, in that instance, it's still the same. When you think about the different types of services and medical coverage and things that are being discussed in today's current political climate, it's these individuals who are being directly impacted. I know someone who has had to make the decision if they are leaving the state that they live in so that they can seek care for their child who is still young but is not identifying with their birth gender. It's hard to put into words because, again, unless you know people and unless you have that empathy to seek to understand, it's hard to make anyone see it. It's because it's not always so overt.
It gives me chills to think about. One of the things that I constantly ask myself is, what can I do? What am I capable of doing? How can I participate to change this? Because I did cross that big 4-0 mark at some point in history. I'm an adult now, so I have to stop waiting for the adults to show up and fix the problems.
Yeah.
Have to be a part of the solution, be the change you want to
Right.
see in the world. But that's a really big thing. And so understanding how to start, where to start, which I think looks different for everybody
Yeah.
depending on, your gifts and your circumstance. You've shared a lot more with me about Harvey Milk, and
Yeah.
I'm so grateful actually to get to know a history expert when compared to me, and also somebody who is as passionate and compassionate as you are, to be able to help me understand a bit more of what I don't even know how to go educate myself on. So appreciate that I have you in my life and others like you to help me bring some enlightenment and give me some direction about how to
Yeah.
better educate myself. One of the things that you've been talking about that has helped educate me is about Harvey Milk. I think you've talked about Harvey Milk, talking about hope, which I think for me is a really good place to start. When you don't know where to begin, start
Yeah.
with your inner feelings and your headspace. Share a little bit about that.
Yeah.
I think you've got a
Um,
quote.
I do. I have a quote. And when I talk about the history of the LGBTQ community being taught, this is one of those people who need to be taught. Did he fight for the rights of LGBTQIA plus people? Yes. But he also understood that the fight that that community was fighting was not dissimilar to the Black and Brown community, the elderly community, people within the Asian community. He saw the connection points when he is like just flippantly spoken about as if his name can be erased and his contributions can be made null and void. It upsets me because this is someone who didn't just fight for his community, for the LGBTQIA community. He fought for much bigger things. There is this really good quote. He gave a speech back in 1978. In it, he says, the only thing they being the LGBTQ plus community, the only thing they have to look forward to is hope. And you have to give them hope. Hope for a better world, hope for a better tomorrow, hope for a better place to come to if the pressures at home are too great. Hope that all will be all right. Without hope, not only gays, but the blacks, the seniors, the handicapped, the us's will give up. And I think that's, to me, what I want people to hear. Because I was one of those kids who felt alone. And it didn't feel good. And when you're that young, home is supposed to be your safe space. And not that I didn't feel unsafe at home, but I didn't get to be my full self. And so it was when I got into this community and started learning about it and hearing about it, like, it's inspirational. And you look at how far we've come and where we are today, and we still have we've come a long ways, that which has been great because we've had both people part of our community and allies to our communities who have helped move these things forward, but we still got a lot of work to do. And so I'm grateful for people like you who do ask, who want to learn more, who want to be an ally, because it's not always easy. It is not easy aligning with a group that people openly speak viciously about. And we need allies. They're important. We talked about it last week. And that's the way that we're going to make movement. And that's what shows hope.
So, hope. If you don't know where to start with hope and think about how you can give hope to those who can't see hope around themselves in whatever community. But particularly this month, we're focused on the LGBTQIA plus community. So, thank you, as always, so much, Chris, for sharing. Um, I appreciate your willingness to be so open, your vulnerability, and your sharing your very personal, real feelings and experiences
Yeah.
so that, you know, the the experience that you walk through becomes more human to those who can't fathom or understand or relate to what it might be like to walk down the street and not be able to hold your partner's hand, or be told by the law that you cannot get married, or
Right?
be taught in school that a part of you that you feel is just wrong because you don't fit the norm. Thank you for your bravery and your courage, which I know you don't feel, but I see, to be authentic and to share. I think that does create hope for others. So with that, we would love to hear from all of you. We would love to hear about your experience. We would love to hear how this shows up for you. We would love to hear where you find hope from, and what pride means to you. So please share with us. You can drop us a comment on any of the channels that you're listening to us on. You can find us on all of the socials at Chris and Jen in the morning, at Chris and Jen ITM, because in the morning is a lot of letters to type out. You can reach us via email. That is chrisjeninthemorning@gmail.com. We did make you type out all of the letters there,
Yes.
but there's no and between Chris and Jen. So just chrisjeninthemorning@gmail.com. Or you can text us, or go old school and actually speak into a phone, which no one does anymore, at 940-278-8129. And tell us what you think. Join the conversation. We would absolutely love to hear from you.
Yes. We want to hear from you. We want to connect with you. Thank you for the opportunity to share our story, share our experiences, and we look forward to another exciting episode next week.
Yeah. So in the words of the wonderful Ellen, until next time, be kind to one another and make it a great week.